My history with the War for Cybertron iterations of Optimus Prime have been rocky, to say the least. Initially, I was already completely enamored with the then-recent Studio Series Optimus Prime, the one based on his Bumblebee design, and thus saw no need for Siege Optimus with his weird Neanderthal-esque floodlights and overt cartoon stylings. But, as is increasingly the case, I caved, and fell in love with that one too. Now I even hold it in higher regard than the Studio Series release, ironically enough. Not even a year later, however, came an announcement from on high. Yet another Voyager Optimus Prime. Well, it was in a liter box since it came with a trailer, but you get the gist. It looked just as amazing as the Siege release and had a proper Earth mode to boot. Still, I placed my foot down and declared that I would never in a million years buy it. Unless it came without a trailer. Lo and behold, the otherwise unnoteworthy War for Cybertron Trilogy subline answered my prayers, and it was good. Welcome to Kit Reviews. My name is Kit, and today we'll be taking a look at Transformers War for Cybertron Trilogy Voyager Class Optimus Prime, with Battlemasters ENERAX and SHEELDRON. These figures were released exclusively at Walmart in 2020 as part of Wave 2 of the Battle 3-Packs assortment, and are redecos of Transformers Earthrise Leader Class Optimus Prime, Transformers Siege Battlemaster Taraxodon, and Transformers Earthrise Battlemaster Sound Barrier, respectively. War for Cyber... You know what? We're calling him Netflix Prime from now on. Netflix Prime's alternate mode is the single most faithful rendition of Generation 1 Optimus Prime's truck mode we've seen in the Generations line. Of course, a lot of artistic license was taken with the finer details, but this truck mode absolutely screams Optimus Prime, louder and prouder than everything that's come before, save for maybe MP10. That's probably the biggest takeaway from Netflix Prime in general. He takes all the important parts of the feel and look of the masterpiece figure and shrinks it down to an affordable price point. It's even more impressive given he's an unabashed descendant of the Siege Optimus Prime mold, whose own truck mode looked rather generically Optimus in comparison. To distinguish him visually from the original Earthrise release, Netflix Prime's color palette is noticeably subdued and desaturated. The Transformers Wiki hypothesizes that this is meant to be more evocative of the original Generation 1 figure, but I remain unconvinced putting them side by side, though to be fair, this is only a reissue. I find the Generation 2 hypothesis to be far more likely, as do Toy Hacks, who have taken the liberty of making labels to convert Netflix Nemesis Prime's trailer into a companion piece for this figure. Sadly, I don't have said trailer, that being the primary reason I opted for this version, so I won't be reviewing that sticker sheet for the foreseeable future. Getting back on topic, this really is one beautiful vehicle mode. Looking up close, you can see acres of wonderfully sculpted detail, and the gleaming silver that adorns his bumper and grille, the headlights and windshield frames, as well as the iconic stripe running along the cab's flank, all do their best to bring it out splendidly. Even the gas tanks are painted silver, though this is probably the ugliest part of the truck to my eyes, as they're just floating in the middle of dead space without any greater context to rein them in. While we're back here, the cab likes to lean forward and won't fasten itself onto the kneecap tabs. Trying to make things sit flush only succeeds in making a gap between the bumper and grille, so it's really a lose-lose situation. Also, Netflix Prime's legs are mostly simple reuses of those of Siege Optimus, only they're in their robot mode position, meaning the central 5mm port is stuck leaning off one side, which looks ugly. They molded an entirely new one between the legs meant to carry Earthrise Optimus's brand new trailer even further back. Why they refused to omit the first port, I'll never know. You're able to store Prime's gun back here in a similar manner to Classics Deluxe Optimus, the one I covered in my second ever review. Alternatively, it can peg into what will become his spine, sitting far more flush here. Netflix Optimus Prime's transformation is a perfect marriage of intuitive simplicity and brilliant complexity, taking the large motions of the original transformation scheme and building onto them to make for a surprisingly fresh experience for an Optimus figure. The legs are extremely simple, far more so than those of Siege. The cab, while featuring many panels, is nowhere near as much of a clearance nightmare as Siege Optimus could be on a bad day. Really, the only issues I usually have are his ears catching on the large hinge joint in the torso. Speaking of which, that joint allows the large, boxy cab to fold in on itself multiple times to form Optimus's strong torso. I've never seen such clean engineering on a Generations Optimus. Previous attempts, such as Siege and the classics Voyager, were satisfied with leaving large amounts of kibble hanging off errantly. But the worst offender on Netflix Prime is an understated butt flap, which is even removable if you're anal retentive. Netflix Prime's robot mode is impressively slavish to the collective mental image we all have of what an Optimus Prime should look like, and still manages to look distinct from the previous year's attempt at the exact same thing. It's impressive, yet also mundane. I've spent weeks staring at this toy on my desk, trying to think of anything really worthwhile to say about him, but for all the quality he has, he lacks anything that really makes him interesting. He's just another Optimus Prime to end all Optimus Primes at a retail price, and he succeeds in doing just that and nothing much more. He looks amazing and just like you'd expect, but I can't help but prefer the look of the Siege released more, even with the added kibble. Netflix Prime's torso is slightly shorter, and I can't help but see him wearing his pants all the way up to his ribcage. The waist assembly, while affording a far greater range and posability, is much blockier too. These minor differences all make Netflix Prime feel a little more stylized than Siege, who himself just looks like a normal dude. I don't know, I'm writing this at nearly 3 in the morning on New Year's Eve just so I can get this out before the year ends, and at this point I just feel like I'm trying to ramble for the sake of rambling, just so I can say something about this toy other than, oh, it's a good Optimus, isn't it? Things are at least somewhat cool in the accessory department. Netflix Prime's Ion Blaster unfurls itself into yet another iteration of this classic weapon, this edition being much rounder and blunter than the Siege version. His chest windows open up to reveal the Autobot Matrix of Leadership, making its first of many appearances using this mold. Having an Optimus come with a Matrix used to feel like a luxury, and it did upon the release of Earthrise Prime, but at this point we've gotten Matrix after Matrix after Matrix, such that if we don't get another one in the next 10 years, it'll still be too soon. On this release, though, it's still welcome. Going back to the theme of budget masterpiece, he's only really missing the often referenced Energon axe. Meet Optimus Prime's newest animal companion, ENERAX. He's a recolor of the Siege Pteranodon mold, which we've already covered back in my Siege Skywarp review, so check that out if you want a more in-depth look at the guy. ENERAX here is colored entirely yellow, both translucent and opaque, and he steps in to become Netflix Prime's target master, transforming into an approximation of the axe Optimus used in the pilot of the cartoon. I think it's pretty clever. There's absolutely nothing clever about Shieldron, however. This fucking piece of shit is a recolor of the flagship of the Earthrise Battlemaster assortment, Sound Barrier, who I've since dubbed Ramp Masters. They're robots that turn into streets. How riveting. I've already glossed over the subject in my Earthrise Slitherfang review, where my love for that figure is wholly removed from the Ramp Master gimmick. Shieldron gets no such love from me. As is plainly visible, his alternate mode is simply his robot mode grafted to the underside of a road. The worst part is that it even interferes with articulation, as his hips can't even move forward unless you like playing with fate and living on the razor's edge. As far as interaction with Optimus goes, he forms a rather shit shield. Still, I always like an Optimus with melee options. Netflix Optimus Prime is jam-packed with 24 dedicated points of articulation, and all of them are fairly useful. The ball joint at his neck is perfectly cut and extremely expressive, allowing for friendly tilts and glowering glares. Sadly, his arms aren't nearly flexible enough to open his chest windows on his own, but once they're open it looks rather convincing, especially with his opening hands. All 4 of his fingers are joined, so he can't point, but he can just about hold his matrix somewhat sloppily. His waist swivel is impeded by the bumper butt, but it can be remedied simply by removing the offending piece. Like I mentioned before, the new waist and hips allow for a far higher kick, since the skirt detailing moves with the leg. The knee bend is just as wonderfully deep as before, and the ankles have an even deeper pivot. By retail standards, Netflix Optimus passes the articulation test with flying colors. When I initially got this figure, I thought it would make for a great comprehensive review. Now, I can't help but feel disappointed that I've had so much trouble finding things to actually say. War for Cybertron Trilogy Optimus Prime is a very good figure, and I'm happy I have it in my collection. The problem is that that's not very interesting. We've been drowned in a glut of red and blue trucks that it's so hard for even the best of them to stand out from the rest. Maybe if I had gotten the Earthrise release, it would have been more interesting, but the whole reason I got this one is because I didn't want to make space for a trailer. I guess that's the Transformer fan in me. I get exactly what I ask for, and I still find myself disappointed. Not with the figure itself, mind you, just what it means to review it. I guess you can cross off Kit Review's downer ending on your 2021 bingo sheet just in time for the year to end. Speaking of which, I'm glad to see everyone stick around through another year of my bullshit, and I can't wait to see what 2022 has in store. While this figure may only get the rank of astounding, all of you in the audience are nothing short of galactic. Well, some of you anyway. If you liked this video or otherwise found it helpful or informative, then please subscribe for more reviews like this in the future, and feel free to suggest topics for future reviews in the comments. When we return in the new year, it's back to Studio Series. This has been Kit Katastrophe, Transform and Roll Out, and Happy New Year!